The carriage wheels groaned as they rolled up the winding path toward Satchwell Estate, the kind of path that looked like it had not felt life in decades. Dr. Eleanor Quinn leaned closer to the fogged window, her breath forming soft clouds against the glass. She had imagined this place countless times while reading faded records and listening to locals whisper its name, but seeing the estate rise through the mist felt different, like stepping into a memory that didn't belong to her. The estate stood tall but exhausted, its once bright stone walls now cracked, its windows dim as though the house itself had grown tired of waiting for someone to listen. The heavy sky hung low, giving the world a muted heaviness. Ellie stepped down from the carriage and pulled her scarf tighter as the damp Irish wind wrapped around her. She had been called to inspect a collection of old documents before the estate's rumoured buyer could decide what to keep. But she knew there was more to this place than what the Historical Society told her. Legends always held kernels of truth, especially legends about vanished women. Inside, the air smelled of dust and forgotten winters. The caretaker, an elderly man with shaky hands and a soft voice, greeted her and handed her a rusty keyring. "Not many come here anymore," he murmured, as though afraid the house might overhear him. "But the society said you're different, said you listen to the stories most historians don't." Ellie smiled faintly. "Stories make history breathe." He nodded, glancing over his shoulder. "Just be careful where you wander. Some rooms remember more than others." She didn't ask what he meant. She had learned early in her career that some truths revealed themselves only when they were ready. Instead, she allowed him to guide her through the entrance hall, its floorboards groaning like they were waking from sleep. Portraits of solemn-faced ancestors watched her from the walls, their paint cracked, their eyes following her with a familiarity she couldn't explain. The caretaker pointed to a portrait of a woman with a soft but determined expression. "Lady Aisling or Satchwell." Ellie paused, drawn to the faint sadness in the woman's eyes. According to legend, Aisling vanished without explanation in 1791, leaving behind letters that suggested she was involved in secret movements and dangerous truths. But the letters had never been found, and official records dismissed her disappearance as a domestic matter. Yet the villagers spoke of her as if she were a martyr of memory itself. "People still leave flowers by the gate for her," the caretaker whispered. 200 years, and she's still not forgotten. "Strange, isn't it?" "Not strange," Ellie replied, unable to look away from the portrait. "Someone must have loved her very much. Or she did something worth remembering." He smiled sadly. "Or someone feared her enough to bury her story." She felt a chill ripple across her shoulders. After settling into a small study room prepared for her work, Ellie unpacked her tools, brushes for dusting pages, cotton gloves, notebooks. She liked this part of the quiet beginning, before the truth began unraveling itself. She opened a box of old estate documents, most torn or water-damaged, and began sorting. But despite the mountain of work ahead, her mind drifted back to Lady Aisling's portrait. There had been something pleading in those painted eyes, something unfinished. The afternoon passed in gentle silence until the main door suddenly opened with a heavy thud. Footsteps echoed through the hall, firm, confident, too loud for someone visiting quietly. Ellie wiped her hands and walked to the entrance, where a tall man in an immaculate coat stood surveying the estate like he owned it already. Sir Rowan Hale. Ellie recognized him immediately from local gossip. Wealthy, influential, a collector of historical properties, and a man who believed history existed to serve reputation, not truth. He turned to her with a charming smile that felt rehearsed. "Dr. Quinn, I presume. I hear you've begun your work already." "Good, good. This place has been silent long enough." She nodded politely, though something about his gaze unsettled her. "I'll need full access to the estate if I am to complete a proper assessment." "Of course," he said easily, then pointed a little too casually toward the west wing. "Though you may find some areas unsafe. Old boards, unstable walls. Best to avoid closed-off corridors. No need to wander into places that don't matter to your work." His choice of words made Ellie pause. "And how do we know which places matter?" she asked softly. "Until we see what they hide." His smile thinned, ever so slightly. "Trust me, Doctor, some parts of the past are irrelevant." She felt her pulse quicken. Men like Hale didn't fear irrelevance, they feared exposure. When he finally left, the house seemed darker. The fog had thickened outside, pressing against the windows. Ellie returned to her work, but something tugged at her attention. A faint draft brushed past her ankles, strange because no windows were open. She followed the draft through a long corridor lined with faded wallpaper. One panel near the end fluttered slightly, as though breathing. Ellie stepped closer. The wallpaper was newer than the rest of the corridor, mismatched by several decades. She pressed her hand against it and felt an unmistakable hollow beneath her palm, a wall that shouldn't be hollow. Her heart beat faster. She pulled a small pocket tool from her bag and pried at the corner, peeling back a strip of wallpaper. Dust puffed out. Beneath it was a wooden door sealed, painted over, forgotten on purpose. The caretaker's warning echoed in her mind. Some rooms remember more than others. Her fingertips trembled as she wiped dust from the seam of the hidden door. The wood was old, older than the wallpaper, older even than the corridor itself. A sealed staircase, hidden, silenced, just like Lady Aisling. Ellie pressed her ear against the door, listening to the quiet hum of the house. It felt as if the air behind the wood held a secret breath, waiting. The truth had been sleeping here, untouched, unfound, unimaginable to those who wanted it buried. She stepped back, swallowing hard, trying to steady her breath. The estate was not simply a building filled with old papers. It was a witness, a guardian, a forgotten storyteller waiting for the right listener. Ellie whispered into the dim corridor, her voice barely more than a breath. Lady Aisling, I'm here. What did they hide about you? And though the house said nothing, she felt something shift, an almost imperceptible sense of recognition, as if the past had finally heard her. Ellie barely slept that night. The image of the sealed staircase clung to her mind like dust on old parchment. She lay awake in the small guest room prepared for her, listening to the house breatheboards settling, wind whispering against the roof, distant echoes that could have been rats or memories. Satchwell Estate felt alive in a way she couldn't explain, its silence heavy yet expectant, as though it had waited generations for someone to ask the right questions. By dawn, she was already back in the corridor with the hidden door. The faint morning light stretched through cracked windows, forming ghostly shapes on the floor. She brushed her fingers across the edges of the door, tracing the uneven lines where someone had once sealed it with urgency. There were scratches on the lower panel, thin, ragged, desperate. For a moment, the thought that someone might have clawed at this door before it was sealed made her breath catch. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting someone to be watching her, but the corridor was empty, save for dust motes drifting lazily in the cold air. Ellie pulled out her notebook and sketched the door, documenting every detail. Her torchlight caught something metallic wedged between the floorboards right in front of the hidden entrance. Kneeling, she eased it out with careful fingers. It was a small locket, tarnished, but still whole, its clasps delicate and hand-carved. She opened it, her breath catching softly. Inside was a faded miniature painting of Lady Aisling Satchwell. A soft ache tugged at Ellie's chest. Aisling's eyes, painted generations ago, held a familiar sadness, the same quiet plea Ellie felt when she first saw the portrait. But here, in this tiny locket, Aisling looked more alive, as if the artist had captured her in a moment of stillness just before she disappeared. Ellie closed the locket gently, feeling the weight of it settle into her palm. People didn't lose objects like this by accident. If it was here, by the hidden stairs, then Aisling had come here, perhaps in fear, perhaps in hope, perhaps knowing she would never be seen again. A shiver crawled up Ellie's spine. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the far end of the hallway, Dr. Quinn. Ellie jerked upright, hiding the locket in her coat pocket. Sir Rowan Hale approached with a too-pleasant smile, his boots thudding confidently on the wooden floor. "You're up early," he said smoothly, though his eyes were already scanning the corridor, assessing her, assessing what she might have found. "I prefer to begin work with the sunrise," Ellie replied calmly. "It reveals details artificial light hides." Hale's gaze flickered to the patched wallpaper, then back to her. "This wing is fragile," he reminded her, voice dipping slightly. "You ought to stick to the east and south wings. They're safer structurally and otherwise." It was the second time he'd told her to stay away. Too precise, too firm to be casual advice. Ellie offered a polite smile to mask her suspicion. "I'll be careful." "I hope so," Hale murmured. "You're a valuable asset, Dr. Quinn. I'd hate for you to waste your time on irrelevant curiosities." He lingered a moment longer than necessary, then left, his footsteps fading into the distance. Only when silence returned did Ellie allow her breath to release. Irrelevant. He had used the same word yesterday. Someone who wasn't afraid wouldn't need to repeat warnings. With Haley gone, Ellie returned to the locket. She snapped a photo of it and placed it safely in her satchel. She felt the faintest hum in the air as she touched the floorboards near the staircase, like a vibration. So soft she might have imagined it, but she pressed her ear against the wood anyway. A whisper of wind slipped through a tiny gap. It sounded like someone exhaling. The rest of the day unfolded like a strange dance between Ellie and the estate. She explored the study halls, reading brittle letters and sorting aged receipts. She visited the library, where books sagged on shelves and old ink bled into pages from dampness. Yet no matter how far she wandered, she felt pulled back toward the hidden stairs. At midday, she left the manor and walked into town to consult the local archives. The archivist, a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes, listened eagerly when Ellie mentioned the sealed stairwell. That would be the silent steps, the woman said, lowering her voice. Though most scholars call that superstition. The silent steps, Ellie repeated, intrigued. Aisling used to write code in her letters, the archivist explained. She had this way of describing things without naming them directly. There was a sketch she made once of a narrow staircase between two walls. It was labeled The Silent Steps Whispered to Me. Some think it was poetic nonsense. Others, she leaned in. Others believe she was hiding refugees, rebels, perhaps documents, perhaps more. Ellie felt her heartbeat quicken. Do you still have that sketch? I'm afraid it went missing decades ago, the archivist sighed. That estate, strange things vanish from it. Ellie returned to Satchwell Estate in the late afternoon with renewed determination. She sensed the house, watching her, listening. As she walked through the long west wing corridor, each footstep echoed oddly, some boards hollow, some dense. The deeper she went, the more the sound seemed to shift, as if footsteps answered her from beneath the floorboards. It wasn't possible, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. She knelt again by the sealed door, running her fingers along the edges. Dust coated her gloves. Something inside her chest tightened on fear, but a deep sorrow she didn't understand. Maybe she was imagining it, but she could almost feel the emotions soaked into these boards. Pain, silence, desperation. She whispered softly, Aisling, what happened here? The corridor remained still. Then, very faintly, one of the floorboards behind her creaked. Slow, intentional, as if someone had stepped on it. Ellie spun around. No one was there. Only a dim stretch of hallway lit by a pale beam of late-day sun. She exhaled, calming her racing heart. The estate was old. It made noises, that's all. But when she turned back, her eye caught something new, something she hadn't noticed before. On the floor near the sealed entrance, the dust had shifted. Where it had been smooth earlier, there were now 3 small marked-in lines, parallel, leading toward the door. They were fresh, unnaturally fresh. Ellie crouched, touching them lightly. The wood beneath was cooler than the rest of the floor. She felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Something or someone had been here after she left. As the last light of day seeped out of the corridor, Ellie straightened slowly, her pulse steadying not with fear, but with resolve. Whatever happened here 2 centuries ago had been buried, deliberately, violently. But the past had a voice, even when muted, and she had always believed that forgotten stories found their way back to those willing to listen. She touched the sealed door one more time. The wood felt warmer now, as if answering her. Ellie knew, with absolute certainty, that she was closer to the truth than anyone had been in generations. Night wrapped the estate like a shroud, thick and unmoving, as Ellie made her way down the west corridor with only a lantern in hand. She moved quietly, not because she feared discovery, but because the silence of the old house demanded respect. It felt wrong to disturb whatever slept within these walls. Yet something else urged her forward, a tug in her chest, a pull she couldn't resist. It was the same pull she felt when she first touched the sealed stairway, a feeling of unfinished truth. The caretaker had retired early, and Hale was gone for the evening, supposedly attending a meeting in town. Ellie felt the freedom in his absence like a sudden gust of clean air. For the first time since her arrival, the house belonged to her and its memories alone. She reached the wallpapered section of the corridor and lifted her lantern. The soft golden glow revealed the faint outline of the hidden door. Her pulse quickened. She placed her palm on the wood. Tonight the surface felt warmer than before, as if the secrets behind it had their own heartbeat. Ellie braced herself, took her small crowbar, and wedged it gently into the seam she had revealed earlier. The wood resisted, groaning softly, but she pressed on. A sudden crack split the silence as the frame loosened. Dust burst into the air, swirling like ash. She coughed, steadying herself, then pulled again harder. The door gave way with a soft sigh. A dark, narrow stairway descended into the earth. The air smelled older than the estate itself, heavy with damp stone, mold, and the faintest trace of something sweet and decayed. Ellie lowered her lantern, its light trembling against the cramped walls. The wooden steps creaked under her weight, each groan echoing like a warning. For a moment, she wondered if she had stepped into a story instead of a place. Aisling's footsteps once filled this very passage. The thought made Ellie's throat tighten. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a small chamber no larger than a pantry. But the moment Ellie's lantern reached it, her breath caught. Books, papers, boxes, a wooden writing desk with its surface warped by time, ink bottles turned to black crystals, and on the far wall 4 sketches pinned neatly, their edges curled with age. But what struck Ellie most was how untouched it all looked, as though someone had left the room only hours before, not 2 centuries ago. She stepped inside, her lantern illuminating the chamber in soft, golden circles. Dust floated like spectral breath as she walked. She reached the desk first, her fingers trembling as she brushed aside cobwebs. Beneath them lay journals, thin, leather-bound books, tied with twine. She lifted one gently, opening it with reverent care. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, the strokes strong yet filled with anguish. They watch my every move now. I hear footsteps outside my door at night. If they find my writings, they will destroy everything. Ellie swallowed hard. Aisling had known she was in danger. She turned another page. Rowan Satchwell says I speak too freely. He says truth is a dangerous thing now. But how can truth be more dangerous than silence? Rowan Satchwell Hale's ancestor. Ellie's heart pounded. She lifted the lantern closer, scanning the rest of the journal. Hastily written passages revealed secret meetings between villagers, discussions of unjust taxes, and evidence of Satchwell men collaborating with British soldiers to betray local leaders. The truth Aisling carried had not only been political, it had been personal. Ellie placed the journal down, her hands shaking. She moved to the sketches on the wall, heart hammering as she recognized the symbols, secret marks used by resistance groups. Among the sketches was one that made her breath catch, a young woman drawn with exquisite care, eyes filled with determination. Lady Aisling herself. A soft sound echoed behind Ellie. She froze. It was faint like fabric brushing against stone. She turned quickly, raising her lantern, but the chamber was still. The only movement came from the dust drifting in the light. She stood still, listening. The old house hummed faintly above, though it felt impossibly distant now. Her ears strained again. Nothing. Trying to steady herself, Ellie looked back at the desk. A final journal lay half open, its last page smeared, torn at the edges. She lowered her lantern, reading slowly. If they break down the door tonight, I must hide the rest. They cannot be allowed to suppress this truth forever. Someone will come. Someone will find it. Someone will know. The last line trailed off, the ink disrupted by a frantic stroke across the page as though the pen was ripped from her hand. Ellie felt her throat tighten. Aisling had been dragged from this very room, moments after writing her final words. The scratches on the sealed door made sudden, devastating sense. A woman fought here. A woman begged here. A woman disappeared here. Ellie pressed her fingertips to the last page, her pulse echoing in her ears. She could almost see Aisling candle flickering beside her, writing by trembling hands while footsteps thundered above. The image struck Ellie so deeply that tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. She reached for another journal, but a soft creak behind her made her freeze again. This time, it wasn't imagination. Someone was at the top of the stairs. Ellie extinguished her lantern instantly, plunging the chamber into thick, suffocating darkness. She held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. Upstairs, footsteps echoed slow, controlled, descending one by one. Hallie. It had to be Hallie. She heard his voice drift down faintly. I warned you about this wing, Dr. Quinn. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She clutched one of the journals, slipping it into her coat pocket. Her other hand searched the dark for a hiding place, but the chamber was too small. The footsteps came closer. Ellie reached instinctively for a loose panel behind the desk. To her astonishment, it shifted. A narrow gap appeared, a crawl space. She squeezed into it, pulling the panel closed, just as Hale's lantern glow bloomed across the room. Through a tiny crack, she watched him stand in the center of the chamber. His eyes were cold, not furious, but disappointed, disappointment laced with threat. He whispered into the quiet, "You should not have found this, Eleanor." He stepped toward the desk and with a swift motion slammed the lantern down, scattering embers. The small flame licked at the papers, and within seconds smoke curled upward. Ellie's hand flew to her mouth. He was destroying it. All of it. Hale watched the fire catch, then turned and climbed the stairs, leaving the room to burn quietly. As soon as his footsteps faded, Ellie pushed the panel aside and rushed out. She could not save everything, but she could save enough. She grabbed armfuls of documents, journals, sketches, stuffing them into her coat and satchel as the heat grew. Smoke burned her throat. Her eyes watered violently. The flame spread to the pinned sketches, devouring edges like hungry mouths. With her lungs screaming, Ellie turned and fled up the staircase, clutching the surviving truth to her chest. As she slammed the hidden door shut behind her, smoke billowed from the cracks, and she pressed her back to the wall, coughing hard. Hale's family had tried to bury Aisling once. He had just tried again, but this time, Ellie had what they feared most, proof, and she was not going to let it burn. Night had settled over the old Satchwell residence like a final curtain, dim and heavy with the weight of truths that had been waiting far too long. The investigation had reached a point where every step, every breath, felt like walking across a fragile sheet of ice. One wrong move and everything would shatter. Avery stood alone in the narrow hallway, staring at the staircase that had swallowed years of silence. It looked ordinary now, almost painfully so, as though it hadn't kept secrets, hadn't held back the cries of a woman who had simply vanished from the world. Avery didn't move at first. She let the quiet settle, listening to the house breathe. The investigation had revealed the truth piece by painstaking piece, but the final weight of it had not yet landed. There were still unanswered questions: why Tina had been silenced, who had allowed the years to pass, and how a life so vivid could be buried beneath floorboards and forgotten like dust. The house felt different now. The ghosts weren't hiding anymore. They lingered openly, hovering in the corners of Avery's mind as she walked slowly down the hall. She had spent years chasing stories, documenting histories that tested her resilience, but this one felt different. This one had crawled inside her and stayed. Tina wasn't just a woman who vanished. She was a reminder of how easily a life could be erased if no one bothered to look. In the living room, the last remnants of the investigation crew were packing their equipment. The silence between them was respectful, almost reverent, as though they knew they had touched something fragile, something that demanded gentleness. Avery stepped outside to breathe. The cold air scraped against her lungs, but it felt honest, more honest than the years of silence that had suffocated this place. Her investigation journal felt heavy in her hands. Every page held fragments of Tina, neighbors who remembered her laugh, a co-worker who recalled her kindness, a sister who still waited by the phone long after hope had drained away. Avery had spent nights imagining the moment when Tina had realized the world would no longer hear her voice. That fear, that betrayal, clung to Avery like a second skin. She walked toward the small garden behind the house, a place Tina once tended with quiet dedication. The soil was dry now, neglected for years. Avery crouched and touched the earth, imagining Tina's fingers brushing the same ground. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it all sit with her. The truth had been found, but justice was a different creature, slow, complicated, often unsatisfying. Footsteps approached. Detective Rowan stopped beside her, his face lined with exhaustion. "It's over," he said softly. Avery shook her head. "No, the investigation is over, but the story is just beginning." Rowan didn't argue. He understood better than most what stories meant, how they could preserve the pieces of a person long after the world tried to erase them. He handed Avery a small envelope they'd found in a locked drawer earlier that day. Inside was a faded photograph of Tina standing beside the very garden they were in. Her smile was bright, full of life, untouched by the doom that awaited her. "She deserved better," Avery whispered. Rowan nodded. "She did, but she has you now, and your story will make sure no one forgets her again." Avery looked at the photograph for a long moment. She felt something shift within her, a promise forming, steady and unbreakable. Tina's story would not end beneath the floorboards or behind the lies that hid her away. It would be told, clearly and truthfully, so that her memory stood stronger than the years that had tried to bury it. Later, as Avery prepared to leave the house for the last time, she paused at the staircase. She placed her hand on the rail, feeling the cold, worn wood beneath her palm. It had witnessed everything. The laughter, the arguments, the violence, the silence, and now, finally, the truth. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure who she was speaking to, the house, the woman whose life had been stolen, or the part of herself that had grown stronger through understanding her. When she stepped outside, dawn was beginning to warm the horizon. The light was soft, gentle, as though the world itself was offering a quiet apology. Avery walked down the path toward her car, the photograph of Tina tucked safely into her coat pocket. She knew this case would haunt her, but not in the way that most did. This one carried something else: responsibility, connection, purpose. Her engine hummed to life, but Avery didn't drive immediately. She looked back at the house, at the windows reflecting the pale morning sky. She thought of Tina, her smile, her kindness, her life unjustly stolen but finally found. "What remains in memory," Avery whispered to herself, "is everything that matters." Then she drove away, ready to give Tina the one thing the world had denied her for so long: her story, immortal and unforgettable.